Hey, back here. We're at the Cafe des Wolves Den here. Jay Burr here with you always. One of our good friends of the show here, Jeremy Harper. See, he's already got his latte ready to go here. Everything's all good. You saw the Twitter handle there, A-State Fan Rules. And then also, we have a treat for you guys. We've got another guest in here today. Oh, there she is. The wonderful Kara Ritchie, our local statistician, our math whiz, all that good stuff here. Kara, how are you?
I'm great. Can you guys hear me? Everything sound all right? I certainly hope that's the case. Doing great. Excited to be here today.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's been kind of a process here getting everything set up here, but we're all good now. Let's get this show rolling here. I do want to, before we get into this bowl game here, I want to kind of look back at the season, and we're going to kind of do this in three parts here. Kind of go through just 4 games at a time here, because I feel like the season was quite different as we went along things here. You see some SMU highlights here. Omar Bayless bursting onto the scene this year in this game. I believe, if I remember right, he had 4 touchdowns in this one. Or was it 3?
Was it? I guess it was 4. Yeah,
3 or 4. Yeah. Nonetheless, he went ballistic in this game. Welcome to the national spotlight, Omar Bayless. Ended up losing that game. We kind of saw some of the struggles with this team, especially on the defensive side early on as well. Offensively, they seem to be clicking with Bonner there at quarterback. But what do you guys think here? What do we take away from the non-conference season? 2-2 kind of seemed to be expected. 3-1 wasn't out of the realm of possibility.
I think what we saw is that what you touched on was that the defense was going to have trouble all year.
Yeah.
And when we start losing guys like Jerry Jacobs and Merrill, that really made it to where we really had no chance on defense. So I think, especially in the first game against SMU, they were doing those dink and dunk passes that were really just picking us apart. And any team that saw that understood they could do that to us all year long. So we really had a hard time overcoming that.
Yeah, Kara, jump in there. What'd you think there of the non-con season?
Well, he covered kind of the defense, so we'll look at the offense. We learned just how explosive that Arkansas State could be. Again, the Omar Bayless kind of set the tone right out of the gate with those 4 touchdowns against SMU. And then we saw, such an emotional high, such a well-played game at UNLV. Another road out-of-conference win, which, of course, there's a short list of those in the past decade. So that was a great thing there. Let's just ignore Georgia, and then, of course, you end up being 2-2 after a win over SIU, and then, and I know we'll get into this in a second, but then things changed dramatically because SIU was, after that game, you lost Logan Bonner, you lost, you had one more game with Forrest Merrill. It was a different team for the latter 2/3 of the season than we saw in the first 4 games.
Yeah, I think the positive side, too, is something you mentioned, too, is that we saw what we had in Logan Bonner. I think we entered the season not quite knowing what kind of quarterback he was going to be. And it turned out he was going to have a historic season. It was a real shame that he got the injury, and then Lane Hatcher steps up for, I guess, the second part.
Yes, we'll touch on Hatch here in just a minute here. But yeah, 10 touchdowns to 1 interception, was really taking care of the ball. And that was against the likes of Georgia in there as well. SMU's defense, pretty sturdy throughout the year. UNLV kind of left a lot to be desired. I think, for me personally, I was feeling pretty good at this time, even at 2-2. They looked good against SMU. That was just a good back-and-forth kind of game. Kind of ran out of time, in essence, in that one. Georgia kind of went the way we all thought it probably was going to go. I would have liked to have seen a little better performance out of that one.
We always do.
SIU, now granted, too, we're dealing with a lot of off-the-field things. Obviously, with the Wendy Anderson thing, they're still adjusting to life. There was a lot of emotions in both of those early games, I think, and even in that Georgia game. And then UNLV, Coach Anderson comes back for the first time this season. So, this non-conference was on the field, kind of probably went the way most thought it would. Would have liked to have been a little better in some little facets of the game, but I think overall it went pretty well. I mean, obviously, getting a solid victory there against UNLV, you had to feel real good going into the conference slate.
Something about the SIU game, though, is what troubled me from the rest of the season was I think we gave up something like, and Kara, you can back me up on, something like 500 yards to SIU. So, even though we won the game convincingly, you could look at that and go, there's going to be some trouble down the line.
Yeah, with SIU, I don't remember the exact yardage, but of course they scored 28 points, which is, a number that you don't necessarily expect against an FCS team or an FCS team to be able to do. One note about SIU is they've been very, very good the past 4 or 5 years against FBS opponents. In fact, they put up, I can't remember how many they scored against Ole Miss a couple years ago, but it was like in the 50s. It was an obscene number of points, 40s or 50s. So it's a team that has always been able to kind of get up for their opponent. So I wasn't necessarily as concerned about the yardage, the amount of points after that one because of what they had done in the past. But then once you started adding in the number of players that went down around that SIU game and then the Troy game as well, then you started to get real nervous about the defense.
Yeah, exactly. And this kind of was just shades of that second year of Coach Anderson's tenure here where, they had small linebackers there playing defensive tackle, and it just couldn't work here. Let's get into the first half of the conference slate here. Games 5 through 8. You had the likes of Troy, Georgia State, Louisiana, and Texas State in there. You figure, okay, should be able to put up a couple of, coin flips in this one. A couple of games you'd think that, okay, Arkansas State ought to handle. You win a game like that against Troy, I was feeling real good about going into that Georgia State game, and then, just gut punched. And for me, that was when a lot of the concerns really, really kicked in, especially on the defensive side, and even, too, a little bit on the offensive side.
I think what we learned about Arkansas State was equal to what we learned about Georgia State this time.
Yeah.
Georgia State actually had a pretty good team, especially on offense. They hired Sean Elliott a couple years ago, offensive line coach. And I think the feeling was, well, that was sort of an odd fit, at least for me. I thought it was kind of an odd fit. But a couple of years later, suddenly they have an offensive line that can make holes.
Yeah.
Or maybe pass or do a little pass protection, and then you had a quarterback who can do something with that. So I really thought, even though we should have beaten Georgia State like we've beaten every year, Georgia State turned out to be a pretty good team. So, yeah, we should have beat them. It was disappointing, but Georgia State turned out to be pretty good.
It's always difficult when you lose a game to a team that you had never lost to before.
Exactly.
Arkansas State had kind of gone out and dominated Georgia State in this series history, so having to deal with that first loss was not ideal, especially with just the statistical numbers that Georgia State put up in that game. That's absurd. 722 yards is a lot. That's always going to be hard to swallow. But Dan Ellington is a beast. Don't look at what Georgia State is doing right now compared to what they did during the middle of the season, because Dan Ellington he's played the last 3 games maybe on a torn ACL. Mm-hmm. So don't judge their offensive production right now on what Arkansas State gave up to them at the beginning of at conference play, because it's kind of 2 different teams. But one thing I want to focus on just for a quick second is the Troy game, since we are talking about the beginning of conference play, because we've talked, I think, a lot as a fan base about games that Arkansas State should not have lost, particularly South Alabama. I know there's still some frustration there, and I know we'll get to that in a little bit, but Arkansas State probably should not have won at Troy. If you go in and think about everything that A-State was up against, and I know everybody's, I see you shaking your head, Jay, but when you go and look at that game, that was the first game with Lane Hatcher starting, so you didn't have Logan Bonner. That was the first game that Forrest Merrill, I think that was a game that Kevin Thurman was out. By the end of that game, Forrest Merrill was out. That was a game where we saw at least 3 different running backs that had to come in and play because Ryan Graham had just torn his ACL the game before that. Marcel Murray was not healthy. That's when we started to see the emergence of Azubuike. That's when Jamal Jones got into the mix as well. And then, of course, that was just a nuts game. I mean, that game ended with a 10-second runoff. So we spent a lot of time writing about this team, about the games they lost and shouldn't have. They probably, with all of the obstacles they had to face in that one, should not have won that game. But yet, at the end of it, came out triumphant. And that was to me, one of the better moments of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. And to sort of, I mentioned introducing Omar Bayless to the scene. Lane Hatcher busting out in a big way. I believe his first pass he completed for, what was that, a 93-yarder. Mm-hmm. You talk about games that you probably should. I think kind of what you were saying about Georgia State, they ended up being better than what we thought. Troy, kind of the opposite way, It wasn't near as good as what we had thought and what we've become accustomed to with them. So I know you mentioned that's one of those games you probably shouldn't have won. I think maybe you could flip those. And would people have even felt better if Arkansas State maybe lost that game against Troy, but then beat Georgia State?
I think the whole season was a little like that.
Well,
if you
yeah.
I mean, if you look at games that we lost games that we had traditionally won, and then we won games that maybe we, like Georgia Southern and Troy, were like games that were supposed to be much more competitive. So if we had lost those games and flip-flopped them, it'd be a little different feeling. But I guess I'm jumping ahead a little bit to the next.
Yeah, maybe
third.
a little bit. But also, too, let's not leave out the Raging Cajuns in this one. I didn't feel good about that game coming into it whatsoever. I know it was the big national stage. A lot of the people in this fan base are really bitter right now about the Cajuns just because they've turned it around so quickly, whereas it seems like there's always something holding back Arkansas State that's not necessarily always their fault. You've had 2 seasons where the team has just been decimated by injuries, things like that. Every team deals with that, but it seems like the Cajuns turned it around a lot quicker than what Arkansas State has. And for the life of me, I can't figure that out. And I know, again, there's a lot of other factors involved in these things. But I can understand the frustration as well. Was just a couple of years ago, these guys were mediocre at best, and now all of a sudden they're cranking out a 10-win season.
Well, Kara, I'm sure you have some good insight on this. I mean, maybe the same I'm going to say. I think what we found out about the Cajuns in that game was that they're a really good team.
Yeah.
They used to be just an offensive team the last few years.
Yeah.
Suddenly they put down a defense that we could not crack. And if looking back in hindsight, I felt like we played the Cajuns pretty good, considering who we had lost and who the Cajuns
Yeah,
were.
and I think that game got away from them a little bit there in the end.
Yes.
So if you take away, maybe the
it was
last
close
few minutes,
until the end. Yeah. So, but it's something that you wanted to win. But it was, in hindsight, it was probably what was supposed to happen.
Yeah, the final score in that one a little bit misleading, as they did get a couple scores late. Sorry, I wasn't sure if I was supposed to jump in there or not. But with that Cajuns team, of course, the thing that makes them go is just they have a monster offensive line that is very, very, very good. Got a lot of accolades from Pro Football Focus this year. In fact, one of the better, if not the best, rated offensive line in the group of 5. And then, of course, that offensive line paves the way for a 3-headed monster at running back, which those guys are just ridiculous. So it wasn't great. It's always a bitter pill to lose to that team, but they're having I think their best season in program history. You go back to the Hudspeth era where they had a lot of success, but I think it was back-to-back 9-win seasons for HUD when they were rolling. This is 10 wins for Billy Napier with a chance to go for 11. So that's a good team. You just hope that this is not a long-standing trend of Arkansas State losing to the Cajuns.
Yeah, because I'd sure like to see Arkansas State in that Sun Belt title game, and to get to that, you're going to have to get through the Cajuns here. All right, let's get to the last third of the season here. Again, just more kind of up and down. You got your typical shootout against Louisiana Monroe. Georgia Southern was a tough game in a right of its own. You got the South Alabama game. What do we make of the way this season ended? Because and I don't want to make light of this, but they've had a chance now to kind of deal with a lot of the emotions of all the stuff off the field. There have been a few weeks here now that some of the kids have had to grow up a little bit. And I know that's been some of the reason for the up and down roller coasterness of the year. But a couple of close wins, you'd think like, man, this team's growing up before your eyes. You had a tough comeback there against Coastal. You hung on against Southern, and then Mobile happened.
Yeah, it looked like to me that the season was really shaping up to be a bounce back from the very first from the first half. That guys that were thrust into duty were finally kind of beginning to gel and get things going. Lane Hatcher was
playing out of his mind.
Playing out of his mind, also showing a few freshman mistakes.
Sure.
So but you were able to accept that. Bayless seemed to bail him out a lot with his just monster athletic ability. So it seemed like we had the ability to win out.
Yeah, we saw Marcel Murray start to bounce back a little bit in there as well.
The running game, we were putting up 100. He was putting up 100-yard rushing pretty routinely at the end. So it felt like everything was coming together. Even if the defense was still struggling, they were managing to make stops when it counted. So that was great until the end.
The frustrating thing about South Alabama is just, unfortunately, we've seen it before. We've seen this team go out and kind of lay an egg against a team they should not have lost to. You had so much potential going into that game. A-State was coming in on a 4-game win streak, and even though 3 of those last 4 wins were by a touchdown or less, you really felt like Arkansas State could really surge through to the end of the season. And that gave you so much optimism because, you know, A-State would get so many players back next year. You'd go into the bowl game on a good run and be able to just re-energize the fan base a little bit. But that was just, it was just frustrating to watch. I'm sure it was frustrating to play, frustrating to coach, and everybody was just frustrated when it was all over. And now, you know, you really need to see this team turn in a strong performance at the bowl game and kind of get everybody in some good spirits for the off season.
Well,
yeah, go ahead there.
Well, one thing going into the bowl game, one thing Anderson did say was that all the motivation they needed to win this bowl game happened at South Alabama. So I like that response. It was like, all right, well, we're going to show the world that we're not the team that lost to South Alabama.
Right, too. And even in those wins, you mentioned some of the frustrations, Kara. I was even frustrated watching some of the wins, and I think it was just a matter of the way they went about winning some of those. I mean, the Coastal Carolina game, exciting. Don't get me wrong. I lost my mind winning that game, but it's Coastal Carolina. Now, granted, they're not like a pushover team, and I understood that, but I mean, it just seems like everything was rolling, and then it just stopped rolling in the middle of that game for some reason. Even Georgia Southern, you think, oh, man, that first half was probably one of the best halves they put together all season. And then the second half, hey, guys, you got to come out of the locker room. You guys realize there's a second half to play here.
Yeah, and I don't know if that was a product of having new guys on the field that hadn't acclimated or still had to acclimate.
Sure.
And so, you know, you get that you get that I don't know, the first few pages of the playbook and everything's going good, and then you can't seem to make those mid game adjustments to close out the deal. Or for instance, against South Alabama, we're playing a quarterback that we just hadn't really seen. You know, I think he had only started a couple games, and he was not the quarterback I expected. I mean, he was making some lights out passes. He was doing some things on the field that I wasn't expecting coming out. I don't know if the team was expecting that.
Right.
So again, and Kara might have a better insight to it, but I thought a lot of that was simply just not being familiar with the offense and defensive.
But that seemed to have been something that has plagued the Red Wolves for years.
that might
There's
be
always a random guy that will just destroy them, and it always seems to be a quarterback that's somewhat mobile, and he's like the third string guy, but then he goes out and throws for 300 yards, rushes for 120 yards, and somehow accounts for 4 TDs somewhere or another. Kara, jump in.
I want to follow up kind of on what Jeremy was saying there on the Georgia Southern game. And one thing I think, you know, when we're frustrated as fans, we fail to give the other team maybe the proper credit. Georgia Southern is a good football team, and in that game, one of the things they did in the second half is they started passing a lot more. Yeah. Arkansas State had frustrated them so much on the ground that they put it in the air. In that game, Shai Werts threw, I think, the second highest total number of passes that he had in his career, because Arkansas State took Georgia Southern out of its game plan. And then Georgia Southern, credits them, went and made those adjustments. And then after they adjusted, Arkansas State had issues adjusting to those adjustments. And then we saw Georgia Southern go and start to build that momentum and almost have their comeback. So sometimes you do have to tip your cap a little bit to the other team, and that's what happened in the second half of that Georgia Southern game.
But I think it seems frustrating. And again, maybe it's just because I've seen this team for a long, long time, but it doesn't seem like they seem to make those adjustments within the game. Right. It always seems like, oh, the next game we see a different game plan, because it seems like a lot of times, you know, they like to stick to the run, and I understand you've got to be able to run the ball and you got to keep trying, but it seemed like a lot of times when the passing game was just clicking, you want to sneak the run in there, and especially too, it seems like a lot of behind the chain type of runs, or, you know, the 3rd and 11. And it's like, if you're going to just run the ball up the middle, we'll just punt it on 3rd down.
Yeah, there were some puzzling calls on that. And as a guy in the stands or in the press box, you really don't know what's going on the sideline. Sure. You don't know what's going on in personnel. And you can question it from left and right and not really know what's going on in the center. But But again, this is a first-year offensive coordinator for us, a first-year defensive coordinator, still trying to figure out a scheme.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes a year, sometimes it takes 2 years. I'm hoping that that's what this is a case of, simply just trying to fit in and figure out what we have and what we don't.
Well, all right then. No, jump in, Carrick. Jump in. I know you got something for us.
No, I'll be honest. I couldn't quite hear everything Harper was saying in some of those last comments.
That's
so
probably good.
I'll punt until the next topic.
There you go. Punt on third down. All right. So let's kind of take a look at some of the numbers for the entire year here. Obviously, you had the El Tri, as I like to call them, the big three there. 206 catches overall, 3,000 yards, 31 touchdowns. I want to say they were probably one of, I think, 2 or 3 receiver combinations that put up those kinds of numbers throughout all of FBS football. So,
and the best trio I've ever seen at Arkansas State, and I've been watching Arkansas State since the 90s, so that was an incredible trio.
Absolutely. Obviously, Omar Bayless, 84, 1,473 yards, had 16 touchdowns. Jonathan Adams, 58 catches, 788 yards, only the 4 touchdowns. Kirk Merritt is a touchdown machine, 64 catches. He had 11 TDs in there as well, had 763 yards. You see Hatcher had a heck of a year as well, 177 to 259, so that's a 68% on throwing the ball, so not too bad considering he didn't play the first 4 games in essence. 2,500 yards, had the 23 touchdowns, 9 picks, but he's a freshman.
Yeah, and I thought one of the reasons for his success too is he really had a lot of faith in those wide receivers.
Yeah.
And when he would get in trouble, he'd just say, "Here you go, make something happen." And I think that worked out for him.
And I think that was a product too of a couple of those interceptions as well. So I mean, when you just throw jump balls, those are gonna happen. You see Marcel Murray there had 153 carries. He's kind of had an injury-plagued year. Still over 700 yards, 6 touchdowns. And the 5 yards per attempt is what really gets me. So you got to be excited for him going forward. Darian Jackson led the way on that defense, had 107 tackles on the year. So what is next? Obviously, 7 wins on the year, get you a bowl game, the Camellia Bowl. Oh, yeah, I forgot we had some of these team numbers here. Let me back up here a little bit. 33 points per game for the team. That put them in the tops in the country. In fact, they were tied for 31st in terms of the offensive yardage. Over 400 a game, well to do there. 44th in the country. Defense, though, that's where things got a little dicey. Giving up 481 yards a game, that put them at 127.
Yes.
Yikes. And then, obviously, when you give up those kind of yards, you're going to give up some points. Almost 35 a game. That put them way down there at 115th in the country. The third downs, though, weren't too bad as the year went on. I mean, it wasn't great in terms of your conversions, but the defense, oddly enough, was a lot better than the offense in terms of third down, so go figure that. All right, so anyways, let's get into this Camellia Bowl here. Taking on Florida International, old-time rival. There you go. Going to be December 21st. That's a Saturday. ESPN, the big ESPN, not the Plus, not the official Sunbelt Network. 4:30, so a nice afternoon kickoff. Temperatures should be nice down there. Should be a nice day to take on your old pals, Florida International. So who are these guys now? Well, they're still doing what they do. Coached by Butch Davis. A lot of people around these here parts might know who that guy is, but they were a very Jekyll and Hyde team this year. 6-6 on the year, so pretty average. They were 3-5 in Conference USA play. They were actually 6-1 at home. They got a 7th home game, kind of wild there, and 0-5 on the road. And I mean, just got destroyed in terms of everything on the road and all that. So I think we lost our picture here, but we're going to keep grinding away here. So it was crazy kind of how things worked out there with their home and away splits. And I forget what the numbers were specifically. Oh, yeah, here we go. At home, they outscored their opponents almost 32-17. On the road, it was a 40-19 shellacking. So again, go figure some of that.
Yeah, what are they going to do on a neutral site? We don't know. Yeah.
I guess we're about to find out.
The numbers on that. I don't know a whole lot about FIU. I do know they had that great win against Miami.
Yeah.
And that was incredible. They're an old Sun Belt opponent, so we have a little bit of Sun Belt beef going into the Camellia Bowl, which might be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
The defense for FIU is not too bad. I mean, they could rank in the top half of the nation for total defense. You saw where we rank in total defense, 127th. So if they're going to stop us, it's going to be on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah.
But
now offensively, they're not incredibly potent either.
they're not. I think their total offense ranks 97th in the nation. So, and it might be because of those weird splits between home and away from home. But yeah, it's not the sexiest bowl game we've ever seen Arkansas State play. But with the Sun Belt beef, it might be there might be a little tension that will be interesting to watch.
I think this matchup is interesting for a few different reasons. One, the Camellia Bowl is a Sun Belt and MAC Bowl, but yet when Arkansas State plays in it, it turns into a Sun Belt and Conference USA Bowl, which is kind of intriguing. History tells us that this could be a close game. The Camellia Bowl has been in existence for 5 years. All 5 of those games decided by 5 points or less, including A-State's trip there in 2017, which was a 35-30 loss. And then last year, Georgia Southern won that game against one of the Michigans. I want to say Eastern Michigan on a walk-off field goal. So it's usually a close bowl game. Looking at FIU, one of the things that you notice about their schedule is yes, they have that huge win over Miami, which I think was just the second Power 5 win in their program history. But you look at some of the other teams that they beat, and UTEP was 1-11, ODU was 1-11, UMass was 1-11. Their 4th win was against FCS New Hampshire. So they beat up on some teams that were not really great. They did get a win over bowl-eligible Charlotte, and then, of course, we've mentioned Miami. And then just to throw some stats at you, because I think that's what you called me at the beginning of the show, is stats, math, whatever. But one of the things that, if you want to be concerned about something about FIU, it's their passing defense. They rank 6th nationally in passing defense. They only give up 178 yards per game through the air, which is a microscopic number. One of the reasons that Arkansas State has been so good in the pass game this year is because they've thrived on explosive plays. A-State has had 61 total plays this season of 20 yards or more through the air. That's good enough for 6th best in the country. It's a huge number. A lot of those plays are chunk plays. But FIU really clamps down on that. And they've given up only 29 explosive plays of that nature, and that ranks them 13th. So that's just an area where they're really, really good. I don't think they've had to deal with anything the likes of Kirk Merritt and Omar Bayless and Jonathan Adams all out there at the same time. But they've been good when they've been challenged this year through the air.
You know, Kara, that kind of reminds me of the outlook then when we had against Georgia Southern. I think we're really worried, or I was personally worried about Georgia Southern's pass defense. You know, they have those two all Sun Belt defensive backs. And my thought was just go ahead and attack those guys. And we did, and it worked. And I wonder if the same strategy would work against FIU.
Yeah, these are the kind of numbers that we bring Kara Ritchie in for. This is the kind of insight that I really enjoy and I love here. I do think you've got to get those guys involved. In fact, let's just jump right into the keys to this game here. We got a few to kind of run through here. I think first and foremost, you've got to rattle Morgan, their quarterback. He hasn't put up great numbers this year, but he doesn't give the ball away. I think only 4 picks on the year. Doesn't have a lot of touchdowns. I want to say about 10. So they're not going to beat you like that. But if you can get in that guy's head, if you can knock him around a little bit, you could get him thinking about it. We've seen this a lot in the past with this defense. If they get to the quarterback, those guys are going to start throwing off their back foot. They're going to rush their decision making. I think if you get in his kitchen a little bit, it would bode well. You know, also, there's rumor floating around that Forrest Merrill's going to make a return for this game. And FIU they rush the ball pretty good. Yeah. So if you have Merrill in the middle and he's as good as he was at the beginning of the season, that to me seems like a tall order coming back from a long layoff like this from an injury that he had. That would be huge. It would be huge to be able to not only rattle the quarterback from passing, but also stopping up the middle. That would be great.
Forrest Merrill coming back would be huge for so many different reasons. And he doesn't have to come back and be Forrest Merrill like we saw games 1 through 4. You need an extra body there as much as anything. The defensive line was supposed to be one of the best units of going into the season for this team, and it had the potential to be, and then everybody got hurt. Because obviously we talk about what happened to Forrest with a torn bicep. We saw Kevin Thurman missed a couple games and then come back and play with that club on his hand. But Tony Adams, who is supposed to be there for depth, broke his foot.
Yeah.
Hunter Morton, who had been out all of last season, came back and played one drive, hurt his shoulder, and was out for the season. You had pretty much, I think, everybody on that defensive line missed at least one game or missed some amount of time or something, with the exception of Javier Carbonell. So if everybody wants to take a quick moment to knock on wood for Javier, that I didn't just jinx him for the last game of the season, but just to have an extra body there for depth so that unit does not get ran down at the end of the game is so crucial, because one of the things that's really hurt this defense somewhat has been the amount of time that they've spent out on the field. Gosh, I couldn't even think of the word for a second. But the Arkansas State's time of possession in a couple of these games was incredibly low. I mean, we're talking like 38 minutes to 22 minutes in that neighborhood, and you would start to see this defense just worn down by the end of the games because of how much time they were spending out there. If you have another body there to work into that rotation, and it's Forrest Merrill, and even if it's not Forrest Merrill at 100%, that's still huge for this defensive line.
You know, and Kara, to expand on that point about the defensive line, does that make William Bradley King's season even that much more special? I mean, he didn't have a whole lot of help at the end, and he was still disrupting and still getting his sacks. You know, he's a special player, and he kind of got put on the back burner in terms of you know, especially with Omar Bayless having his historic season, Lane Hatcher having his historic season.
Well, I think too, just statistically, the way that defense
was
and went as well here. Also, too, these next two keys here kind of go hand in hand here. If you protect the ball, you also give Hatcher some time to maybe try to pick apart that stout Florida International secondary. Protecting the ball kind of goes without saying. This team does have some weird games where they can turn the ball over willy-nilly and still come back and win. But, you know, I think in bowl games, and especially the history that this team has in bowl games, you'd rather not do something like that. But I think also, too, if you give Hatcher some time, you're probably going to protect the ball a little better.
Agreed. Yes. I don't have any
simple analysis.
Yes.
I'll throw something out there. You know, we referenced the Georgia Southern game earlier and just how much of a dramatic swing there was in that game, where it looked like A-State was unstoppable, to where it looked like, you know, the Eagles were going to come back and win that. After about the first 20 minutes of that game, it seemed like Lane Hatcher had a ridiculous amount of time to throw, and because of that, he was able to find Jonathan Adams and Merritt and Bayless, and that's why the passing game was going so well at the beginning. And then there was a lot of frustration in that second half because we saw Arkansas State go more to the run. That was because Hatcher was getting beat up. After about 20 minutes in, we started to see the Eagles, even if they weren't necessarily racking up a lot of sacks, we saw some quarterback pressures, some hits. There was a forced fumble there. So this offensive line has just give Hatcher just a little bit of time. It doesn't have to be an insane amount of time, but just protect him for a little bit. FIU is not a team that ranks way up there in terms of sacks, in terms of tackles for loss. I want to say they're maybe in the bottom third of the country in those two statistics. Now, unfortunately, A-State has made a couple defensive lines look good that typically weren't statistically coming into some of these games, but you have to be able to just give him a little bit of time. You give him a little bit of time, you're going to be okay. And then also there is the hope that Marcel Murray is going to be a lot healthier for this. Poor dude, you know, came into this season with a bum ankle and had to deal with that for 3 or 4 games and was not 100%. Gets to the end of the season when he is just rolling, turns the other ankle, and then was not healthy there for a couple weeks at the end of the season. So if, you know, just having 2 weeks to rest him up, if he's as healthy as he's been in a while, that gives you a lot of hope about this offense, just with what we obviously know they can do through the air, and then if they're able to establish a ground game behind a healthy Marcel Murray.
Which leads us right into our next point. She is a mind reader. Get Murray going, or Jones going. Get somebody in that running game going, because I think, as we saw in like that 3 or 4 game stretch in the middle of the year, kind of blending that second third and that last third of the season, when Murray was rolling, this offense was unstoppable. And when that offense is unstoppable, I think that feeds into the defense, and it kind of limits some of that time of possession that Kara was alluding to.
Yeah, you know, Kara's right. We never have the ball very long, and it wears out our defense.
Yeah.
You put Murray in there, a healthy Murray, it gives the offense another dimension that we didn't always have.
Yeah.
You know, without Murray, we just didn't have that dimension. It was just the Lane Hatcher show, Lane Hatcher, Omar Bayless, Merritt, Jay Adams show. So you're right, if we can get Marcel Murray healthy, if his other ankle, if both of his ankles are okay,
Poor guy.
or even Jamal Jones.
Yeah.
I mean, if we can get if we can make some holes, then I think we won't have any trouble with FIU, especially if Lane Hatcher has that option to just use some of the running game to give him some time. We should be all right.
All right, and then final key here, play with some fire. A lot of times we see this team just look like the Walking Dead.
Right.
I for the life of me, I don't understand what goes on in the locker room. I don't claim to know a football team inside and out, but it always seems like I say always, but there are a lot of instances where it just seems like this team just looks flat. And sometimes I know it's a product of what they do. They're a passing offense. It's just what they do. And if you just can't find that rhythm, you only get 3 plays, and then you've got to get rid of the ball, and then defensively they start to get worn out.
2 things give me hope for fire. One is that after the loss to South Alabama, Coach Anderson was like, hey, all the motivation we need is that loss to South Alabama. We don't want this team to go out as the team that lost to South Alabama.
Right.
Secondly is the fact that Forrest Merrill wants to come back for this game. Obviously, he could sit this one out, get healthy, be ready for, his future. Instead, he says, I want to get back there. I want to have this win. I want to be in this game. So apparently there has to be some inside fire from these guys that want to play this game and want to come out on top.
To follow up quickly on Forrest Merrill, I know there were concerns about, what happens if he comes back in terms of a year of eligibility. He's already played in 5 games this year. So this year is already used up, basically. So if he's healthy, why not 6? This doesn't matter in any way, shape, or form. So, again, if he's healthy, I would love to see him out there. And then with this game, you talked about motivation. You've got South Al just 2 weeks in the rear view. And then on top of that, the guys who've been around for a couple of years, they've ended the last 2 seasons with losses. And they have been bitter losses.
Yes.
The Arizona Bowl was not good. That was a bad game. It was a tough game in the desert, and one that it was pretty awful to see the season end on. The Camellia Bowl in 2017 was not that great either. So you've had 2 different opportunities out there to end your season on a really high note and go into the offseason with some momentum and have not been able to grasp them. They have to change that this year, and surely they're going to be fired up to do so.
Absolutely, and even talking with some of the players this week, a lot of the seniors, they really want that win, and a lot of them have been talking about, the momentum going into spring.
Sure.
The guys, you aren't even going to be around, but they're still talking about that. So hopefully, and I know a lot of them are starting to rally around Coach A, obviously with the, all the Mizzou stuff. I think a lot of them understand, this is how it works, and there might be, now that he's back, it might have changed some perspectives a little bit. You were that close to losing your guy, and it's like, maybe things are a little different now. Maybe you don't know what you got until he
and you
almost
wonder
out
if
the door.
Coach A has a little chip on his shoulder. He might want to prove to the world, hey, look, we're going to show some people here that I can coach, I can lead a team, and I could lose my earbud, and that. So I think he's got a lot of incentive to win this game too. So good news for the fans.
Hopefully, anyways. So I guess in a nutshell, how do we see the 2019 Camellia Bowl going down?
I hate the jinx stuff, but I feel like this game is teed up for Arkansas State. And all Arkansas State has to do is execute from the tee. And if they don't, well, then there's going to be some questions asked. But I feel good about this game. I feel like Arkansas State wins handedly.
Ooh, handedly.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a close one, just because look. I'm not even talking about Camellia Bowl history that tells us it'll be close. I'm talking about A-State's last 4 games. The last 4 games of the season were decided by a touchdown or less. And then on top of that, all in all, you had, 6 games this season that were decided by a touchdown or less? Why not the last one of the season? So I think it'll be close. I do think Arkansas State is capable of winning this one. against FIU. And again, really, at this point in time, you just got to. You have to be able to go out and win this one to end the season. If you wrap up an 8-5 season, that sounds so much better than 7-6. So
Yeah.
you've really got to go out and be able to do that and end the season on a positive note.
There you go, bringing reason and logic to the conversation. This is why we bring you on.
Never again.
For things like this. I think Arkansas State can and should win comfortably. I don't want to say a blowout, but I think this is really going to come down to the FIU offense against the Arkansas State defense, because obviously both of those units have been the weaker side for both these teams, and statistically speaking, they're pretty weak on either side. I think Arkansas State will be able to score. I think they will be able to score a little bit. That red zone is going to be, it's always the wild card in this one. But if they can limit FIU's defense,
Right.
or offense, excuse me.
Okay, well,
Well,
the defense too.
if you limit both sides, hey, you're doing your thing. But I think if they can really shut down the offense, obviously they're not scoring, so surely on the legs of Blake Groupie, who can leg press a house with some of his kicks this year, maybe even just some field goals. But I would much prefer touchdowns.
Yeah,
but
okay.
They're going to have to be those long variety kind. 21 yards or more is what I'm going to see here. So
you think it's going to come down to the kicking game?
It always has the potential for things like that, because bowl games are weird. This bowl game, especially, as Kara mentioned, the way this season has gone for the past 6 games for Arkansas State, I could see anything. I could see them blowing out FIU. I could see a close game. I could see a close loss. I don't think Arkansas State gets handled. I just don't think Florida International has the firepower, despite being coached by a good coach in Butch Davis.
There's no T.Y. Hilton on this FX.
There's finally no T.Y. Hilton. I thought he was going to get the call back from the Colts.
That's something to make you feel good.
Yeah, thank God. No
thank
T.Y.
goodness.
Hilton.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Red Wolves killer. No.
Absolutely here. So, but I think it'll be a fun one. I think it should be an entertaining game, despite the fact that maybe on paper it's not a sexy matchup here. But the people in Vegas, for entertainment purposes only, give Arkansas State a 2.5 point lead right now. For
I disagree with Vegas. I think it's going to be a blowout, Kara. So you can.
Awesome.
But in fact, Sunbelt teams are
favored
to win
4 out of
5. Yeah, and the only one that it's not is Georgia State against Wyoming, and I feel like that's going to be a pretty entertaining game too. And I feel like Georgia State can win.
Well,
that
hopefully
game.
for Georgia State's sake, Ellington is a little closer to 100%.
Yeah, haven't heard if he's going to play that game or not. But you're right, and he's got what's possibly the torn ACL, so he's not the same Dan Ellington as he was before. But he does give the Georgia State the chance that they need. Without Ellington, I don't know if they have a chance.
I guess we'll find out, but it should be a good bowl season for the belt. I think a lot of the matchups play into their favor. Despite even the coaching change there at Appalachian State, they hired an internal guy, so you would think that there's no real change in the way things are going. It's just, I think there's a favorable matchup there. I think Southern has a good matchup. I think Arkansas State has a good matchup.
Definitely, Louisiana has a great matchup.
They should probably win that one going away. So should be a fun time here for the belt. They should be at least in the conversation when it comes to the Capital Bowl trophy or whatever thing they give away.
And good for the conference. The Sun Belt needs conference wins. Yes.
Cash those checks here. All right, guys, so that's going to wrap it up here. This is the bowl special of the Wolves Den, or the Wolves Cafe, as we like to put it right here. Kara Ritchie, where can the people find you, and how can they listen to you and all that good stuff?
Well, I'm easy to find on social media at Kara_Ritchie on Twitter. Daily, I'm the host of the Workday Red Zone. That's Monday through Friday, noon to 2 on 95.3 The Ticket and KNEA 970 AM on your radio dial in Jonesboro, streaming online at 953theticket.com. Going to be a great week, a busy week on our station to do a little bit more shameless self-promotion here. But don't forget there's signing day on Wednesday before we all head to Montgomery. So just a lot of great Arkansas State coverage throughout the week. Basketball conference play tips off on Wednesday. It'll be our first glimpse of Melo Eggleston. Yeah. So it should be some great stuff this week coming up.
Yeah, I'll be listening to all that coverage from Kara and her team.
Absolutely.
You can find me at Arkansas State Fan Rules on Twitter. I write a column for college football news called Sunbelt Heat. So
Love that
look for
heat.
me there. And I'll be at Montgomery.
Yes. Are you going to Montgomery, Kara?
Yes.
All right.
We're all gonna be there.
We'll all be there. We'll meet up here and we'll do it all again here. But again, you got
First
me.
round of football waters on Jay.
Oh, there you go. That's the ticket right there. We'll meet at Winsel's. That's for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Shut that place down here. It's Winsel's. Shout out Winsel's, Arkansas State favorite here. You got me there at DJ Burr and all that good stuff here. That we're going to put a bow on this thing, and we will see you guys in Montgomery for the 2019 Camille Bowl. Again, Arkansas State taking on old Sun Belt Conference rival, now Conference USA foe, the Florida International Panthers. We will see you all next time.